What if the woman scrubbing your hotel lobby floor spoke more languages than your entire executive board? And what if ignoring her cost you millions? This isn't just a story about a black cleaner answering a call in Dutch. It's about what happens when overlooked brilliance finally speaks up, and the empire built on nepotism, fraud, and quiet discrimination starts to crack. In less than a week, Joe Johnson went from being punished for speaking a foreign language to exposing a high-level hiring scam, correcting a diplomatic disaster, and landing a promotion that would shake an entire industry. And it all started with a mop, a phone call, and a billionaire who made the mistake of paying attention. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. It was just another Tuesday at the Grand Plaza Hotel, and Zoe was doing what she did best, making shine out of grime. The marble lobby floor was spotless, her uniform was pressed, and her earbuds, tucked just beneath regulation radar, whispered Beethoven instead of Beyoncé. But when her phone vibrated, she froze. Not because of fear, Zoe had long since learned how to mute her urgency, but because she recognized the number, the University of Amsterdam. After 6 years, dozens of emails, and a scholarship application she'd rewritten more times than she could count, this call was either a lifeline or another polite no. She ducked behind a marble column, whispered Zoe Johnson, and the voice that answered spoke fluent Dutch. Without hesitation, Zoe responded, clear, confident, native-level fluent. As she explained her motivation letter had likely been delayed, she didn't notice that the lobby had gone silent, but someone else had. Richard Coleman, the billionaire owner of the Grand Plaza chain, had stopped mid-conversation, and right next to him, manager Sarah Richards looked like she'd just watched her stock portfolio collapse. When Zoe finally glanced up, it was like stepping into a frozen museum scene where everyone had stopped to look at the artifact. She hung up quickly, whispering, "Ik bel je later," and braced for impact. "Johnson, in my office, now!" The words were a slap. The walk to the basement was long, but the stares from co-workers made it worse. Some pitied her, others smirked, and some looked satisfied. Inside the office, Richards wasted no time unloading. No phones while on duty, you know that. And whatever language you were speaking, French? Dutch, Zoe said automatically, regretting it instantly. I don't care if it was ancient Martian, Richards snapped. Mr. Coleman just saw a cleaning lady chatting away in the lobby like she runs the place. You embarrassed this hotel. And with that, the punishment came swift, reassigned to the convention center bathrooms for the next 3 months. Maybe there you can practice all the languages you want. The smugness in her voice wasn't even disguised. That night, in the tiny apartment she shared with 2 nurses who worked the night shift, Zoe sat under the dull hum of the kitchen light, staring at her linguistics degree on the wall like it was a long-lost friend she didn't know how to talk to anymore. Georgetown honors, 6 languages, international certificates, and 6 years cleaning rooms while sending in applications that no one ever read. 12 times she'd applied to transfer within the hotel to international guest services. Not once did she even get a response. They told her they never received her file, yet she had email confirmations for every submission. Her resume had collected more dust than the chandeliers she polished. Still, she showed up, every day, smiling, silent, excellent, and invisible, until now. She didn't know what Richard Coleman thought of her. She didn't even know if he remembered her face. But she had seen something flicker in his eyes when she spoke Dutch. Not irritation, not confusion. Something else. Curiosity, maybe even respect. And that, she realized, might be the most dangerous thing of all, to be noticed. Because once brilliance is seen, it can't be unseen, and once the system is exposed to what it's ignored, the cracks begin to show. That night, Zoe didn't cry. Not out of strength, but out of resolve. She wasn't just cleaning floors anymore. She was waiting, watching. And if the world insisted on putting her in a basement, it better be ready when she burns the whole blueprint down. Zoe arrived early the next morning, not out of enthusiasm but out of muscle memory. She was used to moving before sunrise, the way people who carry both dreams and disappointment often do. Her uniform was clean, her hair tied back, her smile in storage. But just as she was grabbing her cart for the morning shift, Jennifer at the front desk waved her over. "Zoe Johnson, Human Resources wants you upstairs right now." Zoe froze. HR didn't summon cleaning staff. Not unless something bad had happened. She nodded, barely breathing, her hands instinctively straightening her collar as she headed for the executive elevator. The top floor might as well have been another planet. Suits walked fast, phones never left hands, and everyone had the look of people allergic to eye contact with janitors. She stood outside the HR director's glass office, trying to guess the tone of the next chapter of her life. Fired? Suspended? She replayed the phone call in Dutch over and over in her head, wondering if one beautiful moment had really cost her everything. "Johnson," the HR director said, standing as she entered. "Please, have a seat." The voice was professional, but not cold. Zoe sat stiffly, prepared to defend herself, prepared for another echo of, "You're just not a good fit." Instead, she heard words that didn't make sense. "Mr. Coleman has requested to speak with you, personally." Her throat dried instantly. "Mr. Coleman? As in the owner?" The director nodded. "Yes, he's expecting you now." A different kind of fear crept in. The kind that shows up when a system that's ignored you suddenly decides to look. She walked down the hall as if each step could be her last as a free woman, and when the massive door to the CEO's office opened, she stepped into a space bigger than her apartment, with a view that overlooked most of Manhattan and, apparently, her entire future. Coleman stood by the window, reviewing something in a leather-bound folder. He turned when she entered, gave her a look not of kindness, but of assessment. "Dutch, French, Italian, and Mandarin, correct?" he asked without preamble. "Yes, sir," Zoe replied, confused. "Georgetown, top of your class, internship in The Hague, 6 international publications." He closed the folder, looking her directly in the eye. "And for 6 years you've been cleaning my hotel." Zoe nodded slowly, unsure where this was going, unsure if it was recognition or interrogation. "I asked HR for your resume the second I heard you speak yesterday, and what I found," he paused, "was not just talent, but proof of failure. Not yours, mine." Zoe blinked. This wasn't a reprimand. It was something else. Coleman walked over to his desk and picked up another folder, this one thinner. "Tomorrow we host a trade conference with delegates from the Netherlands and China. Our current translator can't tell the difference between Cantonese and karaoke, and I need someone who not only speaks the language but understands the culture." Zoe leaned forward slightly. "You want me to help translate?" Coleman grinned for the first time. "I want you to coordinate the entire event as temporary international relations coordinator. Effective immediately, salary is $5,000, 0 cents a week." Zoe sat motionless. 5,000 a week? It was more than she made in 3 months, and twice what she'd ever dared ask for. "Why me?" she asked, genuinely baffled. "Because I watched you handle that call with grace, with fluency, and with a level of professionalism my executive team can't fake, because you've been qualified for years, and because now I need results, not excuses." The room felt like it was tilting. Zoe had climbed the building in a cleaning uniform and was walking out as someone running an international operation. "HR will handle the paperwork. You'll have full access. Start preparing." Zoe stood slowly, afraid she might float straight out of her shoes. And then, fate handed her one last encore. As she exited the elevator with her new ID badge clipped to her blouse, she ran right into Manager Richards. The woman's eyes narrowed instantly. "Johnson, what are you doing up here without your uniform?" Zoe smiled, a small, measured smile, and held up her badge. "International Relations Coordinator, at the request of Mr. Coleman." Richards blinked. That's impossible." You don't have the qualifications. Zoe's tone stayed steady, almost bored. Georgetown. Fluent in 6 languages, including Mandarin and Dutch. 12 internal transfer applications, all blocked by you. The woman's face paled, the kind of pale that makes makeup useless. I didn't know. My resume's been in the system for 6 years, Zoe cut in. All it took was one person actually reading it. Her voice was polite, but her words landed like precision missiles. Richards stood frozen, mouth half open, trying to construct a sentence out of lies and panic. But Zoe wasn't interested. She stepped past her, walking toward HR, where the real power shift was happening. Later that afternoon, Zoe sat at her new desk, sorting through translation materials, cross-referencing cultural notes, already mapping out the logistics of the multilingual conference. For the first time in years, her mind wasn't just being used, it was being honored. Her badge caught the light on the desk beside her, and for a moment she smiled to herself. Not because it was shiny or impressive, but because it reflected something back she hadn't seen in a long time. Her own worth, her identity, her justice. The badge glinted like poetic justice dipped in crumb, and for the first time, Zoe Johnson wasn't cleaning up the mess, she was leading the room. The materials for the Dutch-Chinese conference were waiting for Zoe in the executive suite conference room. Stacks of brochures, welcome letters, partnership proposals, and speech drafts. On the surface, it all looked polished. Thick, glossy paper, elegant formatting, the kind of branding that made executives feel like their money was well spent. But the second Zoe scanned the Mandarin documents, her stomach dropped. It wasn't just awkward phrasing, it was wrong, wildly wrong. One line in a partnership agreement used a Mandarin idiom that, in a formal business context, translated to something close to sleeping with the enemy. A bullet point labeled as mutual prosperity had been translated in a way that could be interpreted as profitable exploitation. If these documents were handed out, not only would they offend delegates, they could dismantle deals that had taken months to negotiate. And the best part, the Dutch materials weren't much better. It read like a machine had chewed up phrases and spit them back out with a middle school understanding of diplomacy. This wasn't just incompetence, it was dangerous. Zoe took a breath, then a deeper one. This wasn't a job anymore. It was a landmine field disguised as an assignment. She dug deeper, tracing the digital fingerprints on the translation files. Each one was marked with the name of a third-party translation agency, Apex Global Comms. Sounded impressive. Sounded expensive. But a few calls, one carefully worded LinkedIn message, and a search through contractor records revealed what no one upstairs wanted to see. Apex was owned by Ashley Whitmore, niece of Thomas Whitmore, the director of operations. Ashley had no verifiable credentials in linguistics or cultural communication, no degree, no international certifications, just a basic language certificate and a very powerful uncle, and yet she had secured a standing contract worth $50,000, 0 cents a quarter. Zoe scanned the invoices. The rates were laughable. Triple the market average for work that couldn't pass a college-level language exam. The contracts were padded thicker than a country club couch, and every single one had been approved, signed off, by Thomas Whitmore himself. Zoe sat back, blinking at the screen, her pulse steady but rising. She had stumbled into something bigger than favoritism. This wasn't just a niece getting help. This was a pipeline of fraud funded by ignorance and protected by power. The worst part? Every document bore the hotel's seal. If this conference imploded, the Grand Plaza would take the fall, not Apex. And nobody would look twice at the cleaning lady who tried to warn them. Zoe copied everything. Every invoice, every signature, every email chain. She started a file so organized it would make an IRS agent cry tears of joy. She labeled folders by project, sorted by language, and created comparison charts that highlighted translation inconsistencies. She didn't yell. She didn't march into Coleman's office. She waited, because real justice doesn't panic. Later that day, Coleman stopped by to check progress. He was dressed sharp as usual, but his tone was casual, testing. "How's it looking?" Zoe held up a red-marked printout of the Mandarin brochure. Whoever translated this confused the word for economic partnership with a phrase that could be interpreted as extraction-based conquest. Coleman blinked. That's not great. It's a diplomatic time bomb, she said flatly. If I handed this to a Chinese executive, I'd be disrespecting his grandfather and his accountant at the same time. He ran a hand over his jaw. Whitmore said we hired a top-tier firm. Zoe raised an eyebrow. You hired a top-tier price tag. But not a top-tier translator. And in Mandarin, nuance isn't optional. It's everything. She pointed to another section. This one uses a phrase that's friendly in casual speech, but insulting in a formal business setting. It's like shaking hands while calling someone a peasant. Coleman let out a low whistle. Remind me never to order takeout in the wrong tone. Zoe gave a faint smile, but pressed on. Language isn't just letters. It's history, power, and pride folded into a sentence. If you don't get that, you don't get trust. Coleman's expression darkened. So we're exposed? Zoe nodded. Not yet. I'm correcting it, but someone paid a fortune for the privilege of nearly destroying your reputation? He crossed his arms. Do you know who? Zoe paused. She had the answer. She had the proof. But she also had a bigger plan. Not yet, she lied smoothly. But I'll find out. He nodded. Good. I trust you. And just like that, she had space, time, authority. What she didn't have, yet, was the element of surprise. But it was coming. Oh, it was coming. Back in her office, Zoe closed the door and stared at the open folder. The evidence was airtight, but she wasn't going to expose Whitmore with a single email. No, she was going to let him walk into his own disaster. She'd let him smile, shake hands with international executives, and pretend he'd orchestrated the whole thing. And then, when the deal was about to be signed, she'd let the truth out. Because sometimes justice isn't a hammer. It's a well-placed paper trail. One that whispers while the fraud yells. And when it finally speaks, it doesn't just tear down lies. It exposes the system that built them. Zoe wasn't just translating words anymore. She was translating power. And Whitmore had no idea how fluent she really was. The first day of the conference opened like the prelude to a Broadway show. Polished, expensive, and buzzing with backstage chaos. Zoe, now clad in a tailored navy blue blazer instead of a cleaning uniform, moved through the luxury ballroom like she owned it. Because in many ways, she did. She flowed between Dutch and Mandarin so seamlessly, it sounded like the conversations had subtitles. Delegates looked impressed, confused, then impressed again. Her phone buzzed constantly, not with cleaning assignments, but with real-time cultural questions from the event team. What greeting works best for Dutch CEOs from Rotterdam? How do we reference a Chinese ancestor without sounding like a cheap fortune cookie? Zoe answered without missing a step. She wasn't just translating, she was recalibrating entire conversations. Executives who hadn't acknowledged her existence a week ago were now trailing her like interns with clipboards. Even Coleman, standing back with a coffee and that half-smile of someone watching an investment double in real time, seemed to realize the conference wasn't running because of planning. It was running because Zoe Johnson had walked into the storm, reorganized the winds, and told the rain when to stop. By mid-afternoon, as business cards exchanged hands and tentative smiles turned into preliminary handshake deals, Whitmore made his move. He sidled up beside Zoe with the smile of a man who's spent years perfecting charm like it was a spreadsheet formula. "Miss Johnson?" he began, his voice full of sugary civility. "I've reviewed the updated materials you've distributed. Quite thorough. However, there may have been a misunderstanding. The original translations were vetted by our trusted consultants. I'm afraid your changes may have introduced unintended inconsistencies." Zoe turned to him slowly, brows raised, posture calm but locked like a chess queen about to pivot. "Unintended inconsistencies? You mean like referring to our Chinese partners as economic invaders?" Whitmore's smile twitched. "That phrase was metaphorical." "In Mandarin?" she replied. It translates to something just slightly more diplomatic than declaring war. She pulled a folder from her bag, opened it to a printed copy of the original text, and highlighted a line. This section right here? Do you know what this implies in formal Cantonese? Whitmore cleared his throat, eyes darting, calculating the nearest exit. We believe the original translator had cultural experience. She didn't, Zoe answered crisply, flipping to the invoice with Ashley Whitmore's name. And you know it. Her tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. The receipts did all the shouting. What happened next wasn't in any event schedule. During a coffee break in the main hall, one of the Dutch executives, an older man with a salt and pepper beard and the kind of tailored suit that meant he'd probably shaken hands with royalty, approached Zoe with a wide smile. Are you the same Zoe Johnson who published that article on pragmatic variation in cross-cultural negotiations? She blinked. Yes. I wrote that during grad school. I've cited you twice, he said proudly, turning to his colleagues. This is the scholar I told you about. Two other executives looked up with recognition and joined the conversation, shaking her hand like she was a head of state. Cameras flashed. Coleman, watching from across the room, lowered his espresso cup slowly, then looked at Whitmore. No words were spoken, but the message landed like a wrecking ball. Zoe had become the star of an international conference while Whitmore tried to pass off mediocrity as management. She stood tall in the same heels they used to walk over her, her voice calm, her presence undeniable. What began as a cleaning assignment had turned into a global debut, and for once the applause wasn't because she cleaned up the mess, it was because she stopped one from happening in the first place. But applause was just the soundtrack. Zoe's real triumph came in a quieter room. She met Coleman behind the scenes that evening, sliding a thick folder onto the glass table between them. Everything you asked for. Invoices, emails, company ownership records. Whitmore approved every contract. Ashley submitted the translations under a forged credential. I confirmed with the certifying university. They've never heard of her. Coleman opened the file slowly, his expression unreadable. You didn't just bring me a smoking gun, he muttered. You brought the blueprints to the whole damn armory. Zoe nodded, her voice even. This isn't just a mistake, it's a pattern. Qualified multilingual candidates were denied, over and over. Meanwhile, you've been paying triple for errors that could have cost us everything. Coleman stared at the evidence like it was a mirror, and didn't like the reflection. What's your play? He asked. Zoe didn't flinch. Let him walk himself into the fire. He thinks he's still running this show. Let's give him one last spotlight. Because in just a few hours, Whitmore would stand on a stage, introducing keynote speakers and celebrating deals he didn't make, translations he didn't write, and talent he never respected. And Zoe would be in the wings, holding not just the receipts, but the match. Because sometimes justice doesn't march in with a loudspeaker. Sometimes it arrives in heels, carrying a folder and says, "Your time's up," without ever raising its voice. The executive auditorium had never been this full on a Friday morning. Every manager, supervisor, and department head had been summoned for an urgent restructuring update, though no one seemed to know why. Except for two people. Richard Coleman stood center stage, no podium, no teleprompter, just a remote in one hand, and Zoe Johnson standing beside him like calm thunder. Her presence said everything his introduction didn't need to. He cleared his throat, then began. What we discovered this week is not just an error. It's not just a miscommunication or an oversight. What we found is a system, a quiet, well-oiled machine of nepotism and discrimination that has cost this company talent, trust, and millions of dollars. He clicked the remote. A slide flashed up on the massive screen behind him. Internal audit findings, hiring, promotions, contracts. Next to him, Zoe held a stack of documents, receipts with teeth. The room stiffened as Coleman continued, his voice sharp. Our HR department, with new leadership and recent audits, uncovered 147 current employees with underutilized or ignored qualifications, most of them multilingual, many with advanced degrees, nearly all from minority backgrounds. A new slide lit up. Employee profiles, side by side, with one column labeled Current Role and another Documented Skills. The pattern was nauseating. Line cooks with MBAs, bellhops fluent in 4 languages, a parking attendant with a degree in international trade. Coleman's tone stayed flat but piercing. These weren't oversights, these were decisions. The next slide turned heads, a web of contracts and connections, linking inflated payments for subpar services, translation vendors, consulting firms, all with names tied to current managers. At the center, Apex Global Comms. Beneath it, in bold, Ashley Whitmore, owner. No verified credentials. Coleman paused. It wasn't a staff list, it was a graveyard of forgotten potential. In the audience, some executives looked pale. A few already knew where this was heading. Others were seeing it for the first time. And it didn't look like leadership. It looked like liability. Then came the fallout. Coleman turned toward Zoe and said what nobody expected to hear from a billionaire CEO in a corporate boardroom. This week, one person prevented a diplomatic disaster, exposed internal fraud, and reminded us what actual excellence looks like when given the chance. Effective immediately, Zoe Johnson is being promoted to Global Director of Internal Communications. Applause broke out, slow at first, then rising, as even some who had once ignored her stood to clap. Zoe accepted the new badge with quiet composure, but her eyes scanned the room not for admiration, but for confirmation. She had always been this person. They were just late to the recognition. Coleman turned back to the crowd. Thomas Whitmore has been terminated for cause. Sarah Richards is suspended pending further investigation. The silence that followed was deafening. No one dared shift in their seats. It was the sound of power changing hands. The doors opened at the back of the auditorium and 2 security guards walked toward Whitmore. The man who used to shout orders now couldn't meet anyone's gaze. As he was led out, his face twisted into something bitter and sour. Zoe didn't even look his way. She didn't have to. She'd already won long before he realized he was losing. And that, perhaps, was the deepest cut. Sometimes, Coleman added as the door clicked shut, justice doesn't carry a gavel. Sometimes it wears heels and carries a spreadsheet. But the applause that mattered most came a few minutes later. As the meeting ended and executives filtered out, the back row stood frozen. The cleaning crew. The people in gray and navy smocks, the ones who had watched Zoe for years scrub gold-tinted floors while hiding gold-level brilliance. One by one, they walked forward. Maria, who had cleaned penthouse suites for 2 decades. Gerald, who was fluent in Spanish, Portuguese, and silence. They clapped, not like fans, but like family. A few wiped their eyes. One whispered, "We saw you the whole time, Zoe." She nodded. "I know." Another said, "Now they see us too," and in that moment the room felt different. Not because Zoe had climbed a ladder, but because she had broken it open and built a staircase wide enough for others to follow. This wasn't just about retribution. This was reclamation. This was the moment the janitor lit a match and made the boardroom feel the heat. 6 months later, Zoe Johnson sat behind a desk on the 32nd floor of the newly renamed Grand Unity Tower, where the skyline bowed politely to her office window. The nameplate on her desk read Dr. Zoe Johnson, Vice President of Diversity and International Relations, not because of vanity, but because names, like titles, had long been used to close doors. She was now the architect of an industry-wide overhaul that stretched across 5 hotel brands, 32 properties, and more than 9,000 employees. What had once been a crisis response had become a blueprint for inclusion. Translation costs had dropped by 78%. Internal promotions among minority candidates had jumped by over 60%. Employee retention reached an all-time high. But the numbers only told part of the story. More important were the people, bellhops who now trained as financial coordinators, former housekeepers running logistics, and a receptionist with a law degree now handling contract negotiations. Every Monday, Zoe opened her email to new success stories. Every Friday, she closed her laptop, knowing that quiet talent was no longer invisible. Whitmore, meanwhile, had found new work. Sort of. He was managing a highway motel in Yuma, Arizona, the kind where the vending machine eats your dollar and dares you to complain. His LinkedIn page was blank. His old connections had vanished like coupons for expired privilege. Ashley, his niece, was now enrolled in a community college Mandarin course, taught ironically by a scholarship funded by the Zoe Johnson Foundation for Inclusive Language Education. Zoe never gloated. She didn't need to. The world had a funny way of cashing the checks that arrogance tried to write. Karma travels economy class, but it always lands on time. What made the whole arc even more poetic was that Ashley was doing well in school. People change when you give them tools instead of excuses. And Zoe? She spent her evenings mentoring employees who reminded her of herself, quiet, brilliant, and underestimated. Her office walls were lined not with awards, but with handwritten letters from staff across the country. "Thank you for seeing me. I thought I'd never get out of the laundry room. Now I'm training to be a regional manager." One card came with a single sentence. "You broke the silence." On the anniversary of her promotion, Zoe was asked to deliver the keynote at the annual leadership summit. She stepped onto the stage in a navy blue suit, heels sharp enough to slice doubt in half, and looked out at a room filled with executives, many of whom had once mistaken her for staff in the lobby. She didn't start with numbers, she didn't start with charts, she started with her mother. "My mother had a degree in accounting," she said, her voice calm but rich with memory. "But she cleaned hotel rooms because the world told her that her brilliance didn't wear the right uniform." She paused. "She always told me, 'Zoe, don't ever let them erase you quietly.'" The room was still. "For years I thought success meant being noticed, but I've learned something far more powerful. My worth never depended on their recognition. It depended on my refusal to disappear." A long silence followed. The good kind, the kind that says the message didn't land, it echoed. After the applause, Zoe stepped off stage, her phone buzzing in her pocket, a message from her assistant. "Amsterdam University has finalized their offer. They want you as visiting professor next spring." She smiled. Full circle. What began as a call in Dutch had now become a career that spoke every language of impact. But before she could reply, another message popped up. A photo. A young girl standing next to a hotel front desk, holding a certificate. "First recipient of the Johnson Scholarship, wants to be in hotel management. Her mom cleaned rooms for 15 years. Says you're her hero." Zoe blinked back the burn behind her eyes. Hero? No, she had simply refused to keep sweeping brilliance under someone else's rug. The real legacy wasn't the title or the salary. It was the ripple. The fund she started with part of her new salary had already supported 30 employees and their children, nurses turned analysts, porters turned tech interns, and each of them carried the story forward. The revolution hadn't been loud, it had been strategic, relentless, patient, and it had started with one moment of courage behind a marble column, when a woman picked up the phone and answered in Dutch. Now, every policy, every training, every internal review carried Zoe's imprint. Not just as an executive, but as a symbol, a signal to those still waiting in the shadows. If she could rise, so could they. Zoe didn't need revenge. She didn't even need recognition. What she built would outlast applause. Her sweetest victory was never seeing her oppressors fall. It was watching hundreds finally rise. And as she looked out the window of her office that evening, lights twinkling across the skyline like 1,000 tiny yeses, she knew the final lesson was clear. True greatness isn't just breaking through the door, it's leaving it open behind you. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts.